Under the fractured moon, a single snowflake traced the vein of a forgotten vein, whispering of executions yet to come. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the bitter scent of pine and impending doom. Ilara stumbled through the drifts, her bare feet numb against the unrelenting white, each step a betrayal of the body that had once promised strength. She was no longer the Omega of the Silver Howl pack. She was a ghost, cast out like chaff from the harvest, her scent marked for death by the decrees of 4 kingdoms. The air bit into her skin, sharp as the thorns of betrayal, and she clutched the silver locket at her throat, a relic from her mother, etched with the phases of the moon, its chain now slick with the frost of her tears. It was the only warmth she carried, a fragile talisman against the cold that sought to claim her. Rejection had come swiftly, under the blood-red glow of the harvest moon 2 nights past. The alphas of the 4 realms, Ebonreach, Ironclaw, Stormvale, and her own Silver Howl, had gathered in the great hall of the Crystal Spire, their furred cloaks heavy with the weight of crowns and grudges. Ilara had been dragged before them, her wrists bound in iron vines that burned like accusations. "She is the blight," the High Alpha of Ebonreach had snarled, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. "Her visions poisoned our hunts, her whispers sowed discord among the packs. The goddess demands her blood to cleanse the lands." Lies, all of it. Ilara's gift, the hidden sight that flickered in her dreams like moonlight on water, had foretold a shadow creeping from the east, a rival force that threatened to unravel the fragile alliances. But they twisted her words, called her a harbinger of chaos, an Omega unfit for the pack's survival. Her own Alpha, Thorn of Silver Howl, had turned his gaze away, his broad shoulders hunched under the mantle of duty. He had marked her once, in the fever of youth, but now he stood silent as the verdict fell. Execution at dawn, her body to be left for the crows as a warning to any who dared whisper of destinies unwritten. She had fled in the chaos of the night, the guards' howls echoing behind her as she slipped into the storm-swept wilds. The mountains were no sanctuary. They were a graveyard of ice and stone, where the wind carved faces into the cliffs, mocking the living with the expressions of the dead. Ilara's breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the air before her, and she pressed on, the locket pulsing faintly against her chest like a second heartbeat. Inside it, a lock of her mother's hair, dark as raven wings, and a drop of dried blood from the night she was born under a lunar eclipse. It was said Omegas like her were touched by the goddess, bearers of paths unseen, but what path led to this? Abandoned, hunted, her body a vessel for their fears. The snow deepened as she crested a ridge, the world below a vast expanse of frozen valleys where torchlight flickered like distant stars fallen to earth. Far off, the silhouettes of the kingdom's banners whipped in the gale, black for Ebonreach, iron-gray for Ironclaw, storm blue for Vale, and silver for her lost home. They had demanded her death to seal their pact against the eastern shadow, but in their unity, they had forged her exile. Ilara sank to her knees, the cold seeping into her bones, a vice that squeezed her lungs. Was this the Renacimiento they feared? To die alone, her blood staining the snow like a sacrificial rose? A distant uivo pierced the night, not the triumphant call of hunters, but something broken, laced with pain. It came from the shadowed gorge below, where the wind twisted through narrow passes like a serpent. Ilara lifted her head, her silver eyes marked by the same lunar gleam as the locket, scanning the darkness. The air grew heavier, charged with the metallic tang of blood, faint but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was wounded out there, fleeing as she fled. She should have run the other way. The rational part of her, the part scarred by Thorn's indifference, screamed to vanish into the peaks, to let the storm bury her secrets. But the locket warmed against her skin, an inexplicable pull, as if the moon herself urged her downward. Curiosity warred with fear, a knot in her chest tighter than the iron that had bound her. What if this was the shadow her visions had warned of? Or worse, a trap laid by the packs to end her flight? The Weevo came again, closer now, ragged and raw, carrying the echo of a king's lament. Ilara rose, her legs trembling, and descended into the gorge, the snow swallowing her footsteps like unspoken regrets. The walls of ice loomed, veined with frozen rivers that gleamed under the moon's pale gaze. She moved silently, her Omega instincts sharpening in the peril, the soft pad of her bare soles, the whisper of her tattered shift against the wind. The scent grew stronger. Blood, yes, but mingled with the musk of Alpha, powerful and ancient, laced with the sorrow of battles lost. At the gorge's heart, where a frozen stream carved a silver scar through the stone, she found him. He lay against a boulder, his massive form half buried in snow, armor rent and bloodied. The Alpha King, Ragnar of the Northern Thrones, whispered of in legends as the unyielding guardian of the Frost Realms. His fur-lined cloak was torn, a gash across his chest exposing flesh that should have been impervious. His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, flickered open as she approached, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Guilt etched his features deep as the canyons of his past, and in that moment, under the watchful moon, their fates intertwined like threads of blood in the snow. He did not speak, but his gaze held a question, a plea born of desperation. Ilara's hand tightened around the locket, its lunar etchings catching the light. The wind howled on, but the cold between them shifted, from isolation to the fragile spark of shared exile. What wound did a king carry that bled so freely? And why did her heart, so long silenced, stir at the sight of his pain? Ilara's breath caught in her throat, a fragile vapor that hung between them like a veil drawn by the moon's indifferent hand. The Alpha King's gaze pinned her where she stood, those storm-gray eyes delving into the marrow of her fear, unearthing secrets she had buried deeper than the frost. Ragnar, his name echoed in the legends she had whispered to herself in the long nights of her pack's indifference, a king forged in the fires of ancient wars, his throne a crown of thorns woven from duty and loss. Yet here he lay, broken against the unyielding stone, his chest rising and falling in shallow defiance of the wound that wept crimson into the snow. She took a step back. Instinct screaming retreat, her fingers instinctively curling around the locket. Its silver surface, cool as the grave, pressed into her palm, the etched moons a map of phases she could never outrun, waxing toward fullness, then waning to shadow, much like the trust she had once placed in her own kind. Blood from his gash mingled with the melt of the frozen stream, tracing rivulets that caught the lunar light in fleeting silver arcs. The air thickened with his scent, alpha dominance laced with the sharp tang of pine smoke and the deeper rot of betrayal, a perfume that stirred something primal in her veins, unbidden and unwelcome. "Who are you?" His voice rasped like gravel under boot, low and commanding even in weakness, carrying the weight of realms he had ruled. He shifted slightly, wincing as fresh blood seeped from the tear in his armor, a rent that spoke of claws or blade, deliberate and vicious. His hand, gloved in leather, cracked by cold, twitched toward the hilt of a sword half buried in the drift beside him, but he made no move to rise. Caution flickered in his eyes, mingling with the guilt that shadowed his features, lines etched by choices that had scarred more than his flesh. Ilara's heart pounded, a drumbeat echoing the distant weavos that threaded the wind, warnings from the packs, perhaps, or the wild things that sensed blood on the breeze. She should flee, leave this wounded beast to the mercy of the storm. He was no ally. Alphas like him devoured Omegas like her, claimed them in the heat of need, or cast them aside when the moon turned cold. Thorn's rejection burned fresh in her memory, his silence a blade that had cut deeper than any iron. Why risk this stranger's gaze, this pull that tugged at her core like an invisible tether? Yet curiosity coiled in her chest, serpentine and insistent, born not of hope, but of the void left by her exile. The locket warmed again, an anomaly against the chill, as if the drop of blood within it recognized kin in his spilling life. Her visions had always come in fragments, shadows of paths diverging under the goddess's eye. But this felt different, a revelation half-formed, whispering of destinies entwined. She knelt slowly, the snow yielding like a reluctant confessor, her tattered shift brushing his cloak. Up close, the wound was a chasm, flesh torn from shoulder to ribs, the edges blackened as if seared by more than mere steel. Poison? Or the curse of a rival's mark? "I am no one," she murmured, her voice a thread of silk in the gale, silver eyes meeting his without flinching. Fear trembled in her limbs, but she forced it down, drawing on the quiet strength that had sustained her through trials unspoken. "A shadow, like you, hunted by the winds." She reached out, hesitating, her hand hovering over his injury. The heat radiating from him clashed with the frozen air, a forge's glow tempting her closer. Touch him, and she crossed a threshold. Turn away, and the night would swallow them both in isolation. Ragnar's breath hitched, his body tensing as if her proximity ignited old fires. "Touch me, and you bind yourself to war," he warned, his tone laced with melancholy, the voice of a king who had seen thrones crumble under the weight of oaths. Guilt shadowed his words, a specter from battles past, whispers of a queen lost to treachery, pacts divided by his unyielding code. He had declared war on the four kingdoms not hours before, in the grand hall where their alphas had bayed for her blood. "They come for me now, the betrayers of Ebenreek and Ironclaw, Stormvale's spies woven into Silver Howl's ranks. Your scent. It marks you as their prey. Flee, little one, before my ruin claims you." His words struck like arrows, piercing the veil of her denial. So he knew of her condemnation, the decrees that painted her as the blight. The connection sparked instinctive, a magnetic pull that hummed in her blood, Omega to Alpha, exile to fallen king. But she denied it, rationalizing the warmth in her veins as mere survival's trick, the curiosity as folly. "I have nowhere left to flee," she replied, her voice steadying as resolve hardened within her. With trembling fingers, she tore a strip from her shift, the fabric whispering farewell to modesty, and pressed it to his wound. The blood soaked through instantly, hot and sticky, staining her skin like a vow unspoken. Pain flared in his eyes, but so did something softer, gratitude perhaps, or the first crack in his armored solitude. The wind rose, carrying the faint crackle of distant torches, the kingdom's hunters closing in like wolves on a shared kill. Ragnar's hand closed over hers, gentle despite his strength, his touch a bridge over the chasm of their fears. In that grasp, empathy flickered to life, fragile as a flame in the snow, transforming isolation into the seed of a bond. They were both marked for death, her by decree, him by the war he had ignited in her name, though she knew it not yet. The locket pulsed against her chest, its lunar phases glowing faintly, as if the goddess herself witnessed this union born of necessity. As the first howls echoed closer, Ragnar pulled her down beside him, his body a shield against the encroaching night. "Then we stand together." "Shadow," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The denial lingered in her mind, a barrier against the instinct that urged surrender, but curiosity held her there, weaving their fates tighter under the moon's unblinking eye. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you." The storm's fury cloaked them like a shroud as Ragnar's arm encircled Alara's waist, drawing her into the lee of the boulder where the wind's howl softened to a mournful dirge. The snow piled against the stone in relentless waves, burying the evidence of his blood and her hesitation, forging a temporary bastion in the gorge's unforgiving embrace. She pressed against his side, the heat of his body a stark rebellion against the frost that clawed at her skin, his cloak, torn and heavy with the weight of northern kings, draping over them both like a promise forged in desperation. The locket at her throat thrummed, its silver chain a tether to the pulse of something ancient, the drop of blood within it echoing the crimson stain spreading across the makeshift bandage she had bound to his wound. Hunter's howls sliced through the gale, closer now, a chorus of pursuit that vibrated in her bones like the tolling of a death knell. Ebonreach's trackers with their obsidian-furred hounds, Ironclaw's iron-shod warriors, boots crunching the ice like grinding teeth, Stormveil's veiled assassins, shadows slipping through the drifts, and Silverhowl's own Thorn's pack, their silver howls laced with the bitterness of her betrayal. They came not just for her, the Omega deemed a curse, but for him, the king who had shattered their fragile accord with a single thunderous decree. In the Crystal Spire's hall, as the Alphas bayed for her execution, Ragnar had risen from the fringes, his voice a blade of ice. "Touch her, and you invite the wrath of the North upon your thrones." War, declared in her name, though she was a stranger to him then, a whisper on the wind. Alara's breath mingled with his, shallow and synchronized, as they huddled in the dim hollow. Fear coiled in her gut, a serpent twisting tighter with each distant bark. But beneath it stirred an unfamiliar warmth, not the instinctive pull of Omega to Alpha, which she still rationalized as the chill's cruel illusion, but a fragile empathy born of shared ruin. His guilt radiated from him, a palpable shadow, heavier than the snow's burden. She sensed it in the tremor of his frame, the way his free hand clenched around the hilt of his sword, knuckles white as the moon above. What wars had he waged to earn such sorrow? What queen or kin had fallen to the very oaths he upheld? Her own rejection paled in comparison, yet mirrored his, cast out for visions that foretold discord, he for defending a phantom cause. "Stay low," Ragnar murmured, his voice a rumble against her ear, laced with the melancholy of a man who had commanded legions, yet now whispered like a fugitive. He shifted, wincing as the movement tugged at his wound, fresh blood seeping warm and viscous through the fabric. The scent of it filled the air, metallic and intimate, mingling with the pine-sharp musk of his skin, stirring her senses despite the denial screaming in her mind. This was survival, nothing more. To linger was folly, to trust in Alpha's protection, a repeat of Thorn's indifference. Yet she did not pull away. The locket warmed against her chest, its lunar etchings catching a sliver of moonlight that pierced the storm, illuminating the phases like scars on time's face, crescent to full, a cycle of loss and return that mocked her exile. The first shadows crested the gorge's rim, silhouettes against the fractured sky, torches sputtering like defiant stars in the blizzard. A hunter from Ironclaw led them, his armor gleaming gray as tempered steel, axe raised to signal the pack. "The king's scent trails here," he bellowed, voice whipping through the wind, followed by the guttural snarls of hounds straining at chains. Alara's heart hammered, a wild rhythm that drowned the rational barriers she had erected. She imagined their claws rending her flesh, their jaws closing around the locket that held her mother's essence, the blood drop within a final offering to the snow. Ragnar moved with predatory grace despite his pain, his body a wall between her and the encroaching threat. He drew his sword in a fluid arc, the blade singing as it cleared the sheath, its edge notched from battles that had carved guilt into his soul. "They seek the Omega's head to seal their cowardice," he said softly, eyes locked on the hunters above, storm-gray depths flickering with ethical fire. "But I see in her what they blind themselves to, a pathfinder's light, dimmed but unbroken." His words pierced her, unraveling the knot of fear. He knew of her gift, The visions twisted into accusations, yet spoke of it not as blight, but as beacon. Empathy bloomed in that moment, tentative petals unfurling in the frost, transforming the instinctual wariness into a bond forged in the crucible of peril. She nodded, silent, her hand finding his arm, not in submission, but alliance. Together, they rose to the crouch of defenders, the gorge's walls their ally, narrowing the approach to a fatal funnel. The first hound lunged over the edge, a black furred beast with eyes like embers, but Ragnar's sword met it mid-air, a flash of steel severing sinew in a spray of hot blood that steamed on the snow. The creature's yelp echoed, a visceral cry that spurred the hunters downward, their boots avalanching into the drift. Alara's visions flickered then, unbidden, a cascade of images under the moon's gaze. Ragnar's fall in a greater war, her hand staunching a deeper wound, kingdoms crumbling like ice under spring's thaw. The locket pulsed hotter, as if the goddess wove their threads tighter, blood and moonlight the loom. Torches flared closer, illuminating snarling faces twisted by loyalty to false thrones. An iron-claw warrior charged, axe swinging in a wide arc that whistled through the air, but Alara dodged, her omega agility a ghost's grace, snatching a fallen branch to jab at his eyes. Ragnar parried the next blow, his movements a dance of controlled fury, each clash ringing like judgment. Blood slicked the snow, his and theirs, painting the gorge in crimson runes that the wind scattered like prophecies. A Stormvale assassin slipped from the shadows, dagger glinting, aiming for Ragnar's unguarded flank. But Alara was there, shoving him aside, the blade grazing her shoulder in a line of fire that burned deeper than flesh. Pain bloomed, hot and accusing, but she met the assassin's gaze with silver defiance, her free hand clutching the locket as if to draw strength from its bloodied core. The fight blurred into a symphony of survival. Weavos swallowed by the storm, the crack of bone on stone, the wet thud of bodies yielding to steel. Ragnar fought not with rage, but melancholic precision, sparing where mercy allowed, his guilt a chain that tempered his strikes. One by one, the hunters fell, Ebonreach's tracker gutted, Ironclaw's axeman disarmed and fleeing into the blizzard, Stormvale's shadow pinned beneath Ragnar's boot. Silverhowl's scout, a young wolf with eyes like thorns, hesitated at the sight of her, but Ragnar's blade ended the mercy, a clean thrust born of necessity. The gorge fell silent save for the wind's lament and their ragged breaths, the snow now a tapestry of red and white, blood freezing into jagged crystals under the moon's pale witness. Alara sank beside him, her shoulder throbbing, the metallic taste of exertion on her tongue. Ragnar's hand found hers again, calloused fingers intertwining with trembling grace, the bond solidifying in the aftermath. Not love, not yet, but a shared vigil against the night. His eyes met hers, haunted, yet softened, the guilt yielding to a quiet reverence. "You fight like one born to redeem," he whispered, voice raw with the weight of what they had wrought. The locket cooled against her skin, its phases a reminder of cycles unbroken. As the distant howls faded, the enemy routed, but the war far from quelled. In that refuge of bloodied snow, empathy had woven them closer, a fragile alliance under the goddess's eye, where denial cracked like ice under dawn's first light. The moon hung low, a fractured silver shield over the gorge, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the blood-streaked snow. Alara leaned against the boulder, her shoulder a throbbing ember of pain where the assassin's dagger had kissed her flesh, the wound shallow but insistent, a reminder that survival demanded its toll. Ragnar knelt beside her, his breath steadying from the fray, his storm-gray eyes scanning the rim above for signs of renewed pursuit. The air reeked of iron and frost, the metallic bite of spilled blood mingling with the crisp bite of pine carried on the wind's relentless sigh. Bodies lay strewn like fallen banners, hunters from the four kingdoms. their forms half buried in drifts, eyes glazed in eternal surprise under the lunar gaze. Yet victory tasted of ash. The war Ragnar had unleashed echoed in the distant Weavos, a chorus swelling from the valleys below, promising retribution under the dawn. She pressed a hand to her injury, fingers coming away slick and warm, the crimson staining her skin like an accusation from the goddess herself. The locket at her throat pulsed faintly, its silver surface warming against the chill, the etched phases of the moon seeming to shift in the dim light, a waxing crescent edging toward fullness, mirroring the visions that had long haunted her. Denial still clung to her like frost on fur. The bond with this Alpha King was necessity, nothing more, a fleeting alliance born of shared peril. His touch earlier, that calloused hand over hers, had stirred instincts she rationalized as mere adrenaline, the Omega pull a trick of the blood to ensure survival. But as he tore another strip from his cloak to bind her wound, his movements gentle despite the warrior's scars mapping his arms, something deeper stirred, a curiosity laced with the melancholy of her exile, whispering that isolation's end might come at the cost of her guarded heart. Ragnar's gaze met hers as he worked, his fingers deft and unyielding, the heat of his proximity clashing with the gorge's icy breath. Guilt shadowed his features, deeper now in the aftermath, as if the lives taken weighed heavier than the blade that had carved his chest. "You should not have intervened," he murmured, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of northern winds through ancient halls. An Omega's grace is not meant for the fray. Ethical fire burned in his eyes, the melancholy of a king who had sworn oaths to protect the weak, yet whose wars had orphaned packs and widowed mates. He had lost a queen to treachery years past, or so the legends breathed. Her blood on his hands, a stain no snow could cleanse. Now, defending a stranger's life, he invited the four kingdoms' fury upon the north, his throne a pyre awaiting the blaze. Alara winced as the fabric tightened, the pain sharpening her senses, but she held his stare, silver eyes gleaming with the same lunar defiance that had marked her visions as both gift and curse. "Grace unbroken fights harder," she replied, her tone steady, laced with the philosophy born of rejection's forge. What was strength, if not choosing to stand when the packs turned away? The locket thrummed hotter, an insistent rhythm against her chest, as if the drop of blood within, her mother's legacy, sealed under eclipse, sensed the convergence of paths. She had always resisted the full bloom of her sight, fearing it as the blight the Alphas named it, the whispers that had foretold their alliance's fracture. But here, in this bloodied refuge, with Ragnar's ethical gaze upon her, the barriers cracked. The wind shifted, carrying a low rumble from the east. Not thunder, but the growl of an approaching host. The kingdom's full might, marshalling under torchlight that flickered like vengeful stars on the horizon. Ragnar rose, sword in hand, his form a silhouette of armored resolve, but Alara's vision unfurled then, unbidden and vivid, crashing over her like a wave of moonlight on frozen waves. The world blurred. She saw not the gorge, but a vast hall of ice-veined crystal, the four Alphas enthroned in arrogance, their packs sealed with her blood as ink. Yet beyond, a shadow uncoiled from the eastern mists, a rival force, not beast, but betrayal incarnate, led by a figure cloaked in raven feathers, his eyes burning with the fire of forgotten gods. The shadow would consume the kingdoms unless unraveled, its tendrils already woven into Silver Howl's ranks, Thorn's indifference a thread pulled taut. Gasping, Alara clutched the locket, its chain biting into her palm as the images sharpened. Ragnar at the heart of it, his war not folly, but the key to revelation, her visions the map to sever the shadow's hold. The goddess's eye gleamed in the dreamscape, a full moon bathing them both in silver, binding their fates in blood and light, the drop in the locket mirroring the crimson rivers yet to flow. She was the pathfinder, the Omega born to illuminate paths unseen, her rejection not curse, but catalyst, destined to heal the king's wound, not with herbs, but with truth unveiled. The vision released her with a shudder, leaving her trembling, the gorge snapping back into focus. Ragnar turned, sensing the shift, his hand steadying her shoulder. "What do you see, Shadow?" he asked, voice urgent yet compassionate, the melancholy yielding to a dawning awe. In her eyes he glimpsed the lunar gleam, the same that had drawn him to declare war in her name, instinct deeper than guilt, a spiritual pull toward redemption's edge. Tears froze on her lashes as she met his gaze, the denial fracturing like ice under pressure. "The shadow from the east," she whispered, words tumbling forth in a rush, poetic and raw. "It creeps not as enemy, but ally to the betrayers within. Thorn, he is blind to it, as are the others. Your war buys time, but only my sight can trace its heart. A temple lost in the frost-fang depths, where blood oaths bind the false kings." The locket cooled, its phases settling into clarity, as if the revelation had realigned the stars. She was no blight. She was the key, the Omega, whose exile forged the destiny he sought, her gift a beacon to crown mercy over might. Ragnar's breath caught, guilt transmuting to reverence, his hand lingering on her arm, a bridge from protector to pilgrim. The Weavo swelled closer, the enemy undeterred, but in that moment, under the moon's unyielding watch, he saw her truly, the healer of wounds unseen, the one to redeem his fractured throne. Yet the ethical dilemma loomed, a spiritual fork in the snow-swept path. Embrace her light and risk all, or cling to solitary duty, letting the shadow devour them both. The wind howled its question, blood and fire the only answers left. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The gorge's walls pressed in like the jaws of an ancient beast, the wind's wail a dirge for the fallen hunters whose blood now froze in intricate patterns across the snow, veining the white with threads of crimson prophecy. Ilara's vision lingered in her veins, like moonlight trapped in water, its revelations a double-edged blade, truth unveiled, yet heavy with the weight of what it demanded. Her shoulder throbbed, the bound wound a pulsing reminder of the fray, but it paled against the deeper ache in her chest, where the locket hung warm and insistent, its silver phases etched with the inexorable march from shadow to light. She had spoken the words, the shadow's heart laid bare, and now Ragnar's gaze held her captive, storm-gray depths swirling with a reverence that both terrified and anchored her. The Omega in her recoiled, rationalizing the pull as the aftershock of peril, a survival instinct masquerading as destiny. Yet the Pathfinder's gift stirred, whispering that resistance was but another form of exile. He rose slowly, his silhouette towering against the fractured moon, sword still gripped in one scarred hand, the other extended to her, a gesture not of command, but invitation. Blood from his chest wound seeped anew, staining the snow at his feet like spilled ink from a king's decree, and the scent of it mingled with the sharp ozone of the storm, stirring her senses into a whirlwind of fear and unspoken yearning. "The temple in the depths," he echoed, voice a low rumble that cut through the gale, laced with the melancholy of oaths long broken. Guilt shadowed his features, deeper than the canyons carved by northern rivers, for he knew the cost of such truths. Confrontation with the packs that had forged him, the betrayers whose treachery mirrored his own past failures. A queen lost to a rival's blade, packs sundered by his unyielding pursuit of justice. These were the wounds no locket could heal, yet in Ilara's silver eyes he glimpsed a possibility of redemption, fragile as frost on a flame. The Weavos swelled from the east, a tidal wave of sound crashing against the peaks. The four kingdoms' forces converging like rivers of fury under torchlight that painted the horizon in flickering gold and red. Ebonreach's obsidian banners snapped in the wind, Ironclaw's ironclad ranks marching with the grind of armored boots, Stormveil's veiled scouts slipping through the drifts like ghosts, and at their heart, Silverhowl's silver-furred warriors led by Thorn, her once mate. His broad frame a silhouette of indifference turned to wrath. They came not merely as hunters, but as judges, the crystal spire's decrees etched in their snarls, her execution to bind their pact, Ragnar's head to quench the war he had ignited. The air thickened with their scents, a cacophony of alpha dominance and pack loyalty pressing against Alara's skin like invisible claws, dredging up the rejection that had shattered her world 2 nights past. She stood beside him, legs unsteady in the deepening snow, the locket's chain a cool weight against her throat, its blood drop within pulsing in rhythm with her quickening heart. Introspection gripped her, slow and suffocating. Was this bond with Ragnar a chain or a key? Love, if it dared bloom here, was no gentle thaw, but a moral forge, demanding she choose between the freedom of solitary flight, vanishing into the wilds, her visions buried like seeds in frozen earth, and the peril of alliance, forgiving the pack's blindness to embrace a war that might redeem them all. Thorn's face haunted her mind's eye, not with longing, but accusation. He had marked her once, in the moonlit glade of their youth, only to avert his gaze as the Alphas condemned her. Now he led the charge against the king who had defended her unseen, his betrayal the shadow's deepest root, woven into Silverhowl's oaths. The first wave crested the gorge's rim, a torrent of fur and steel spilling downward in a controlled avalanche, torches hissing steam from the drifts. Ragnar stepped forward, his body a bulwark, sword raised in a salute that spoke of ethical resolve rather than blind rage. "Stand with me, Pathfinder," he called over the din, his voice carrying the spiritual gravity of a man who had stared into the abyss of his guilt and chosen light. Not as captive, but equal. The goddess tests us, power or compassion, war or the mercy that crowns the fallen. His words pierced her, unraveling the rational barriers she had clung to. The instinctual pull, once denied, now bloomed into tentative acceptance, a tenderness born in the crucible of shared pain, where his melancholy mirrored her exile's sorrow. Thorn emerged at the forefront, his silver pelt matted with frost, eyes locking onto Alara with a mix of shock and simmering fury. "Traitor Omega," he snarled, voice booming like thunder over the peaks, his pack fanning out in a semicircle of bared fangs and drawn blades. "You flee with the North's mad king, dragging us all to ruin. The 4 realms demand your blood for the discord you've sown. Visions that fractured our hunts, whispers that invited the eastern shadow." Behind him, the other Alphas flanked. Ebonreach's high Alpha with obsidian eyes gleaming hatred, Ironclaw's brute hefting a war axe, Stormveil's veiled leader hissing commands like serpents. The air crackled with tension, the moon casting their shadows long and twisted, blood from earlier skirmishes steaming faintly under the celestial gaze. Alara's breath caught, the wind whipping her hair like raven banners, the locket burning against her skin as if the goddess urged her forward. She stepped from Ragnar's shadow, silver eyes meeting Thorn's without flinching, the weight of her revelation a fire in her chest. "Blind Alpha," she countered, voice steady and poetic, carrying the introspective depth of one reborn in rejection. "Your pacts are the discord, woven with the shadow's silk. I saw it. The temple in the Frostfangs, where blood oaths bind you to the raven-cloaked betrayer from the east. Execute me, and you seal your throne's fall. Spare me, and mercy reveals the path to true alliance." The words hung in the frozen air, a philosophical gauntlet thrown, her gift manifesting not as curse, but clarion call. Ragnar's presence bolstered her, his ethical silence a vow of support, the guilt in his stance yielding to the quiet strength of shared destiny. Chaos erupted then, visceral and cinematic. Ironclaw's axe swung in a wide arc, met by Ragnar's blade in a clash that sparked like forge fire. the impact reverberating through the snow. Thorn lunged at Alara, claws extended, but she dodged with Omega grace, her hand clutching the locket as visions flickered, paths diverging in blood and moonlight, forgiveness a blade sharper than steel. Stormveil's assassins darted from the flanks, daggers glinting, one grazing Ragnar's arm in a fresh line of red that sprayed across the white. Alara parried a blow meant for him, her torn shift ripping further, the cold biting her exposed skin like judgment. Uivos rent the night, bodies colliding in a ballet of fury and frost, blood arcing under the moon like sacrificial wine, the gorge a cauldron of war where every strike echoed moral quandaries. Thorn pinned her against the boulder, his breath hot and ragged, eyes boring into hers with the pain of lost claim. "You were mine to protect," he growled, claws pricking her throat, the proximity stirring old wounds deeper than flesh. "Now you choose this outsider's war over your pack's freedom?" The choice loomed, spiritual and raw. Forgive his blindness, extend compassion to redeem the pack's, or embrace liberty in rejection, letting war consume the betrayers. Ragnar roared, charging to her aid, his sword a whirlwind that forced Thorn back, the king's guilt transmuting to protective fire. In the melee, Alara's vision sharpened again, the raven figure laughing from the temple's depths, Thorn's unwitting complicity a thread to sever. As the alphas circled, weapons raised for the killing blow, Alara rose, locket aglow, her voice cutting through the storm. "Choose, Thorn, power's illusion or the mercy that births true strength." The wind howled its approval, blood and snow the canvas of their judgment, the moon witnessing the ethical precipice where love's redemption teetered against war's abyss. Ragnar's hand found hers amid the fray, a silent pact as the packs hesitated, the dilemma etching doubt into their snarls. Yet the shadow stirred unseen, promising that no choice came without sacrifice. The goddess's test far from ended. The moon's fractured light bled into the gorge like silver ichor, illuminating the chaos as a tapestry of shadowed forms locked in eternal struggle, blood arcing through the air in crimson parabolas that froze mid-fall against the unrelenting snow. Alara's heart thundered, a wild cadence echoing the clash of steel and fang, her hand still entwined with Ragnar's amid the fray, a tether forged in the heat of necessity, now pulsing with the raw undercurrent of something deeper, undeniable. The locket at her throat burned like a brand, its lunar etchings alive with the visions that cascaded through her, the raven-cloaked betrayer in the temple's heart. Thorn's unwitting hand sealing the shadow's pact with a drop of blood not unlike the one sealed within her talisman. Rejection's sting twisted anew, not as wound but as catalyst, urging her toward the precipice where freedom dissolved into choice. Thorn circled her once more, his silver pelt flecked with frost and gore, eyes narrowed to slits of conflicted fury, the alpha's dominance warring with the ghost of their shared past. His claws had grazed her throat moments before, drawing a thin line of warmth that trickled down her collarbone, mingling with the sweat and snow on her skin. "You speak of mercy as if it mends thrones," he snarled, voice a guttural rumble that cut through the weavos of his pack. The silver howl warriors holding formation behind him, their breaths fogging the air like hesitant specters. Ebonreach's high alpha flanked him, obsidian gaze unyielding, while Ironclaw's brute and Stormveil's veiled leader pressed the assault on Ragnar, their weapons a symphony of grinding metal and splintering bone. The wind howled its indifferent judgment, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of torches sputtering in the drifts, the gorge a crucible where moral fires tempered or consumed. Ragnar fought like a tempest contained, his sword a blur of ancient steel that parried Ironclaw's axe with a force that sent vibrations up Ilara's arm through their joined hands. Fresh crimson bloomed on his forearm, the gash from the assassin's earlier strike reopening, but he did not falter. His melancholy had transmuted into ethical resolve, each strike a deliberate stroke toward redemption rather than vengeance. Guilt shadowed his every movement, The queen he had failed, the pacts he had sundered, yet in protecting Alara, he glimpsed absolution, her silver eyes a beacon pulling him from the abyss. "The shadow binds you all," he roared over the din, voice resonant with the spiritual weight of a king reborn in exile. Her sight reveals it, blood oaths in the Frostfang temple twisted by the East's deceiver. War for her death only feeds the beast you fear. Alara pulled free, stepping into the fray's heart, the cold air searing her lungs as she faced Thorn. The pack's circle tightening like a noose of fur and iron. Introspection gripped her, slow and visceral. The Omega within resisted still, rationalizing the bond with Ragnar as the storm's illusion, a desperate grasp at warmth in the void of rejection. But the locket's pulse synced with her own, the blood drop within a mirror to the rivers staining the snow, whispering that love was no reward but a trial, redemption earned through sacrifice. Freedom tempted, slip away into the peaks, let the kingdoms devour themselves in their blindness. But compassion stirred, a philosophical flame. What was power, if not the mercy to heal the broken, even those who had cast her out? Thorn's gaze flickered, doubt etching his snarl. He had marked her under a kinder moon, only to choose duty over her visions, his pack's survival over her truth. Now, that choice echoed back, demanding reckoning. The high alpha of Ebonreach lunged, his obsidian claws raking toward her side, but Alara twisted with instinctive grace, the locket swinging like a pendulum of fate, her vision sharpened in the peril. A final cascade under the moon's gaze, the temple's icy altar, the raven figure chanting over a basin of mingled blood, Thorn's paw print etched in the stone as unwitting accomplice. She seized the moment, voice rising poetic and unyielding. "Thorn, the shadow uses you, your oaths, your rejection of me, all threads in its web. Sever it now, or watch Silverhowl fall with the rest." Her words hung, a spiritual gauntlet, the wind falling silent as if the goddess herself paused to listen. The packs hesitated, weapons lowering fractionally, the air thick with the scent of pine blood and thawing doubt. Thorn's form shuddered, his eyes locking onto the locket, recognizing its gleam, the lunar phases that had once drawn him to her in the glade's silvered hush. Pain warped his features, the Alpha's pride cracking under the weight of revelation, guilt mirroring Ragnar's own. "Alara," he breathed, the name a fracture in his resolve, claws retracting as the truth pierced deeper than any blade. In that breath, the circle broke. Ironclaw's brute faltered. Stormveil's leader hissed retreat, Ebonreach's alpha snarling but stepping back into the shadows. The eastern shadow's tendrils recoiled unseen, the temple's oaths fraying at the edges of mercy's light. Ragnar sheathed his sword, bloodied but unbroken, turning to Alara with eyes softened by awe, the melancholy yielding to quiet union. He extended his hand again, not as king but equal, the touch a vow sealed in shared scars. She accepted, the instinct blooming fully now, resisted no longer, accepted as the renascimento they both craved, not conquest, but healing through sacrifice. Her exile's pain, the balm for his guilt-ridden throne. They stood together as the packs withdrew, Thorn's final glance a bridge of forgiveness extended, the war's blaze dimming to embers under the moon's benediction. The locket cooled against her skin, its phases complete in fullness, the blood within a testament to cycles reborn. Rejection transmuted to destiny, love as the ultimate redemption. The gorge emptied, snow falling soft as absolution, burying the stains of battle in a white veil of promise. Alara leaned into Ragnar's side, the warmth of his presence a hearth against the eternal frost, their fates intertwined like veins of moonlight in stone. In the quiet, under the watchful goddess, they walked toward the peaks, the temple's path illuminated not by torch, but by the light she had always carried, healing wounds of flesh and spirit alike. The wind whispered of thrones reclaimed, packs reunited in compassion's forge. And in that union, true strength was born, not in war's roar, but in the mercy that crowned the fallen. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.